you could receive. So Risk Forward is not your typical book. It's more of an experience. And in tonight's talk, we'll hear about that and what Victoria shares. And she has a background in the arts, writing, performing, directing, producing. And she has taken that background to create two programs, Risk Forward and Rock the Room. And to that end, she's the trusted consultant to CEOs and top teams at companies like Starbucks, Microsoft, Coca-Cola, and PayPal, as well as cultural and educational institutions. So she's also a member of the Speaker Hall of Fame, which I am not, but I am doing my best.
You're doing great.
Thanks. And a keynote speaker on some of the biggest stages around the world. And so her connection to this area, as I think many of you have heard, is that she's been coming to West Cornwall to a family home for
decades,
years, pretty much probably her whole life. And I was astonished to read that she was a cub reporter for the Lakeville Journal. So roots right here in the Northwest corner. Yeah. And we're very happy to have her here today with us. So I think we're going to start with just a few questions for Victoria. And if you have questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and we will get to them, and we'll just see how we move through this. So again, thank you all for being here today. So there's a quote that was in a recent article in Forbes, and the journalist wrote that this book is not your typical book, which is probably why it stopped me in my tracks. Risk Forward is a mosaic that will change the way you view your life forever. So why is that?
Well, it's not your typical book because I'm going to show you why, physically show you, because this is Zoom. We have the benefit of video, unlike, say, an audio podcast. And, growing up, I used to go to the library in West Cornwall, and I would pore over the books with pictures, and I learned a lot through visuals combined with words. And when I got older and I started doing big events and working with teams, I still like books with visuals. I think we learn through pictures and words. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So I've always wondered, how could I write a book that built on my love of children's books but had adult messaging? And so I designed a book, and I'm going to show it to you. And if you can see this, just type in the chat, I can see this. So can you see me holding this up so I can just see if people can see? So it looks like this inside. It's full color, which most, adult books are not, like, colors for kids, they think. And every page is different. Like some pages have diagrams on them. This is a page which we'll talk about later called the Iceberg of Indecision, when you're feeling indecisive. This is a picture about vision. And this is a section on how we follow what's right for us. So some pages are text, some pages are diagrams. And I thought, how can I create a book that's an experience? As Claudia mentioned, I come from the performing arts, and in the arts, whether we're making a film or putting on a play, we're thinking, how do we take the audience through a journey, an experiential journey? So they're sort of chuckling at times and thinking at times and emotionally moved at times and then learning at times. And I thought, I want to write a book that is a little like that type of experience for the reader. However, I'm also the kind of person, which some of you may be as well, where when I get a book, I don't want to read it in order, unless I have to. If it's a novel, of course, I'll read it in order. But if it's another type of book, I tend to flip around. So I wanted to make a book that was both linear, so you could read it front to back, but also accessible for people who like to dip in and dip out. So you can read the book in any order, and you can read it from front to back. And instead of a table of contents at the cover, I trademarked this idea of a circle of contents, because this book is about the journeys we go through in our life, and we go through them again and again, sometimes in the span of minutes and sometimes in the span of months. So that is the design and the experience of Risk Forward.
Oh, that's really intriguing. I like that. I really like the circle thing, and I like the visuals. So what led you to write it?
I grew up with a lot of different interests in my life, writing, performing, drawing, producing, and for many years I was unclear on my path. And some of you may have nieces and nephews like that. They're coming out of college, or some people might have gone through a divorce, or they're going through a health change, or they're in a career change, and they're in a change. All these types of shifts in our life when we're not sure exactly what's next. COVID, for example. And people would always say to me as I went into these business environments, as my career grew through the arts and into business, people would say, what's your plan? What's your goal? Where do you want to be in 1 year, 3 years, or 5? And there was this kind of pressure. Unless you were clear and had a plan and a goal, you couldn't succeed. And I grew up with this myth that unless I had that plan and that goal, I was going to be a failure. But as I went through my work, and as I went from the performing arts and I started doing keynotes, because I went from performing to speaking, and then from speaking to coaching, and coaching to working with CEOs, I learned that some of the top companies in the world and some of the biggest creative projects didn't start with a plan or a goal. They started with a wisp of an idea, and the person figured it out as they went. And the more honest and authentic the CEO was, or the leader of some Hollywood film, whoever I was meeting, the more honest and authentic they were, the more they were willing to admit that, yeah, they had periods of self-doubt. Yeah, they didn't always know where they were going. And so I felt there was this divide between kind of the public approach of like goals and clarity, which has huge merit. There's value in that. I have goals, I have clarity at times, but there's also times when I don't, and when I realized a lot of successful people don't. And I wanted to address that gap and talk about the value of that gap. Because as I say in the book, if you can meet that void, that gap, without grasping for the most convenient way out, what you find will be beyond your expectations and imagination. Because what happens is when we're in that gap, people force us and they pressure us. And whether that's personal or professional, like when I was not married in my 20s, and some of you attending know me from that era, people were like, when are you going to get married? What's the problem, Victoria? What's Victoria's secret, right? And if I had just grasped for the most convenient person, I would have been in a pretty uncomfortable position. And as I started to tell people as I got older, I skipped my first divorce. So in business too, people pressure you, or in work or in personal decisions. And I thought, if we can risk forward, which is to go into that not knowing, what we find will be beyond our imagination. So that's why I wrote the book, to address that gap and give value to that gap and take the pressure off people.
Okay, great. No, that's very intriguing. And I just heard on a podcast I listened to that when Jeff Bezos was projecting the potential success or failure of Amazon, he gave it something like a 20% chance of succeeding. Yet he went forward, for whatever reason. But
I love that. That's good to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming it's true, although I didn't check it out. But anyhow, and how about the opening line of the book that draws us into your...
Yeah, so I think some of you may relate. This is the opening line. Some people in life know exactly what they want to achieve. This is a book for the rest of us.
Well, being what I call a late bloomer, I can definitely relate to that kind of
awesome.
finding my way. But,
yeah.
And what have you found that most resonates with the book's messages?
Yeah, I think, the people, it's interesting when you write a book, the publisher's always saying, who's the audience? And, I said, it's really for anyone who's in a period of transition. And so, we're finding, it's people who are leading a team into new territory, or they're in a creative project, a novel, an art project, a film score, and they're trying to figure out their next steps. And they're wrestling with that. It could be a kid who's just, like I said, graduating from college. A lot of people are getting the book for their college kids, or even teens, which surprises me. It's someone who's gone through divorce, as I said earlier, a health transition. It's anyone who's what we call the fog of not knowing. That's what I call it in the book, the fog of not knowing. And as I said earlier, sometimes that's just for minutes. Like you're working on a new newsletter or a new blog, or you're having a conversation with someone in your family and you're thinking, should I speak up and say that? That like little gap for moments, whether it's minutes or seconds, that is the risk forward gap. And people are using it to realign their companies, to figure out their new career shift for their lives post-COVID. So it's really for anyone who's in that period of transition. I got a text from Dickie Smothers, who's of the Smothers Brothers. Dickie's 81. And I sent him the book because I know him from the world of performing arts. I have a background in comedy. And he said, this is the perfect book for me right now. Because he's looking at the last phase, what he thinks might be the last phase of his life. And he's like, what do I want to do in this last period of my life, you know? And he's got pressures and people saying, what's the plan? And then my 23-year-old assistant who just graduated, she's like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm thinking the book seems to be connecting with people in 80s and 20s. My sister Lisa, who some of you know, who are on here, had a dear friend who just lost her husband. And she wrote a text to my sister and she said, yeah, I'm in the fog right now. Because, you know, everyone says, what are you going to do now? And good God, of course she doesn't know. She's just coping. So that's who's resonating with the book.
Yeah.
It's meant to give people permission and to really give them that freedom to not know.
Yeah, and I think that's you know, a tough place to be, and many of us are finding ourselves there for the first time after going through this past year, where you think that you're just marching along and you know what you're doing, and then all of a sudden, whammo, things change, and you have to reassess. So yeah, I think your
Yeah.
timing is perfect. But
Yeah, who would have thought, right? By the way, Claudia, some people ask, did I start the book when the pandemic began? And anyone who's in the book industry knows it's like 18 months from start to finish when you sign a contract. So I actually signed the contract for the book in the summer of 2019, long before COVID.
yeah,
And then it was actually during COVID that I wrote it, but I'd already planned most of it. So it did work out, and I'm hoping it helps a lot of people.
yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like it would. So you had perfect timing on that one, I'd say, or pretty much as good as it gets. But so around the piece of indecision, I think you talk about 5 myths. Can you share some of that with us?
Absolutely. So, you know, I don't know who here relates. And if you don't relate, I'm pretty sure you can think of someone you know who struggles with this. But as I said earlier, had a real problem growing up knowing which direction I wanted to go. And it manifested as indecision, whether I was picking out a pair of pants. Should I get the blue ones or the beige ones? You know, should I go here or there? Should I take this job or that job? But I learned somewhere along the way, pretty early on, that was not societally a good trait. Like, indecision is considered a negative trait, and decision making or decisiveness is sort of applauded, especially in the business and work world. Like, good leaders make good decisions fast, or rather, good leaders make fast decisions. But as I say in the book, you know, I think decisiveness is overrated. And that goes counterculture, which a lot of risk forward does. Like, not knowing is not a bad thing, or decisiveness is not necessarily a good thing. And I've seen a lot of leaders and a lot of parents and a lot of young people try to mask their indecision and sort of force a decision because they want to look clear-headed or, you know, not weak. They want to look strong. But in so doing, their decisions are not great. So as I say in the book, how great is decisiveness if you make a bad decision? And I have a client, I do a lot, as I said, as you heard in the opening from Claudia, I do a lot of corporate consulting with CEOs, and I had a top client who said they call it strategic procrastination. Like, there is value to delaying a decision, even though society tells you there's not. And, you know, there are times in my life I certainly made a mistake. I remember a few years ago, I got offered the opportunity to do a presentation on this person's stage at his big event with a few hundred people in the audience. And he said, would you come and present? But there was a sort of a string attached, which was if I was to present, it was a type of deal where the host, he would get a cut, a 50% financial cut of anything that I sold as a result of presenting. So he was incentivized to have me sell something with a bigger price tag. And he said, look, if you're going to speak on my stage, you have to sell something that's this price. And I said, I don't have anything at such and such a price. But he said, well, you have to. And I thought, well, I'll create something at that price. I'll develop a whole new program. And all of a sudden, the tail was wagging the dog. And I said, yes. And then I made this whole new kind of business model. And I won't go into all the details, but it literally took me off track for 2 years. And if I just paused, and I so vividly remember walking down Riverside Drive in Manhattan, and I was talking to my friend on the phone, and I said, I have this offer to speak on this person's stage, and I was looking down at the pavers, those sort of hexagonal pavers on Riverside on the boardwalk side, and I can see it like it was yesterday. And she said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I'm just gonna say yes, because I couldn't tolerate my indecision, because I didn't want to look weak, and I didn't want to embarrass, and I just said yes. And that one yes led to a big detour. And, it turned out okay. I learned a lot. But, I think if you have someone in your life who's struggling with the decision of any level, because it's never the decision, it's what's below the surface that's really going on. And that's why I referenced earlier this iceberg of indecision, because all people see, and I'll show you the picture again, it won't really show up very well because of the lights and the camera, but you can kind of see it here. This is what people see. They see the person at the top going, I don't know. But all these are the real reasons below. The fear of making a mistake. I'll just read a couple. Or, fear of repercussions. Or maybe you have a vision that's unfolding, but it's not formed yet and you can't articulate it. So you're just saying, I don't know. And then people pressure you and you don't want to look stupid or weak, so you just commit, and then you're stuck. And so on the next page, I offer a few series of questions that you can ask, and ask people, yourself, others, when you're feeling that. And it's like a guidebook, because my heart hurts when I see people impugned for being indecisive. And I feel like, no, these people should be protected. And cared for in those moments. So I feel very strongly about that. And I do see leaders, and as I said, parents and friends, I'm going to decide. And I just see them marching off, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that's probably not wise. So it's worth taking your time.
Yeah, and I can see that too in just the, not even if it's a decision, but just the pressure to respond to something, that something comes at you with a question, however insignificant, and you feel like you have to respond right away.
Yeah.
And for me, it took a long time to realize I don't have to. I can wait and think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the best questions when people ask me about this, I often say, by when do you need an answer? And it's sometimes farther out than you think. People, I'll get back to you tomorrow, instead of saying, by when do you need an answer? And sometimes they'll say, by the end of the month, and you think, oh, thank God. Or, next week is fine. Thank God, right? And then when people ask me, how do I figure out where to go? A, read these questions, but B, find someone whose advice you trust. And as I say, by the way, we have a little resources center that goes with the book, because I didn't want to make the book thick. So it's really short. You can read it in an hour and a half. But we took a lot of the extra material, we stuck it in an online resource center. But one of the things in the resource center is this statement, which is, don't tell your problems to people who can't help you solve them. So if you're having marital problems, don't talk to someone who's got a crappy marriage. If you're having financial problems, don't talk to someone who's got their finances in a mess. And yet we do that. We're having a struggle with something that the nearest person to us knows nothing about. We blurt it out, and they give us crappy advice and makes us feel worse, because then we want to protect them and make them feel like, oh no, that was really helpful. We're trying to accommodate their bad advice, and it's just a mess. So I love that line, don't tell your problems to people who can't help you solve them. And honor your indecision. I say that in the book. Honor your indecision. There's wisdom in indecision. There's a reason you're indecisive. It's telling you something. Like when you have a pain in your body, you know, it's there for a reason. It's trying to get your attention. So,
And do you want to share any of the questions that you have around this?
yeah, I'll share a bunch here. Sure. So,
Homeowner,
you know,
incredible tip is just for you. If you owe less than $331,760 on your home and haven't
that's so funny. Who is that?
Somebody who was just muted. That's who that was.
If you own that much money, wow, that was the most bizarre thing. I hope that was an ad.
or the learn more button.
Uh-oh. Let's do that again. Okay.
That was so weird. All right. The first question, I just want to stay on it for a moment, is why might this not be right? That's an important question because sometimes we try to convince ourselves that it's either right or we make ourselves wrong for not wanting it. Instead of simply making the argument for why might this not be right, let's make a case for why this actually might not be right. What could be a better alternative? What could be? Maybe not what is, because it may not appear yet, but what could be a better alternative? This one I love. What am I not admitting? And then there are a few others, but I'm going to stop there because that's enough. I'll confuse everyone's head. It's too much information.
No, I mean, it's a lot of it gets, to me at least, gets on getting really clear on your inner self.
It's, yeah, this is a book about really listening to yourself.
Yeah. And there's a very touching section near the end about your mother. Would you be willing to share anything about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, again, some of you who are here know me from many years ago and knew my mother, who was an extraordinary woman. And I'm actually going to read this because I spent a lot of energy writing this story, and if I half tell it, I'll botch it because it's just a page and a half, and I think it's quite special. So I just want to see who's still with us. So just type in the chat story if you're still with us and attentive. So I don't want to read to a not attentive audience here if people are like making home deals for $300,000. Okay, good. So we got a bunch of people listening. So this is a story about my mother. It's just near the end of the book. There, as I said, there are 35 chapters in the book, but some chapters are half a page. You can read the whole book in less than an hour and a half. You can see it's super short. So this is towards the very end. It's not the end, but it's this far to the end. And it's titled Your Life's Work. And early in the book, I explained that just after 9/11, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So I'd watched the Twin Towers come down outside my window. And then that was Tuesday. Then 2 days later on Thursday, 9/13, September 13th, 2001, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Friday, we went to West Cornwall. So this is from that piece of my life. The day after my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, we gathered at our family's home in Connecticut. As the evening arrived and the light began to dim, my mother went outside and walked to the edge of our property, gathering evergreen branches, twigs, and flowers from her garden. Back in the house, she laid everything out on the hearth and stood before an open vase on the mantel. Piece by piece, she began to create a bouquet. She did this every Friday evening and always referred to it as her life's work. I flopped down on the oversized living room chair, my legs dangling over the edge, and I watched her moving as if she were conducting a silent orchestra, sliding stems into the vase and then gently lifting them back up into position. And recognizing that she would be gone in a matter of months, I realized I never quite understood why she called this her life's work. And so I asked. Branch in one hand, cutters in the other, she turned toward me. When I was appointed to be on the board of a corporation, I was the only woman who held a seat, she said. The men on the board asked me to give a speech to the company. How did I get to where I am in my life? A PhD, a published author, associate director of an institute, 4 children. Because I never had a 5-year plan. I always just did what was next, as best I could. And then the metaphor I came up with was this, and this is the story I told them. Every Friday, as my family gathers in the evening at our home, in the dying light of the day, I go around the house and I find what I can. A pine bough, a twig, some flowers, and with that I make a bouquet. I do my best with what I've got. This is my life's work. She pivoted back and continued conducting. A branch arched off to the left. A stalk with purple flowers jutted to the right. I like how it's not symmetrical, I murmured. Yes, she nodded. Things should be not perfect.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's lovely. So,
And it's really the core message of the book that we each do the best with what we've got. And Risk Forward is all about heading into the unknown. And I'll talk a little bit about that just at the end of the Q&A for the group. I'll share the secret story behind where Risk Forward comes from as a term. And really that ultimately it's about like heading into the unknown, doing our best when we don't always know where we're going and having a plan. And taking what makes us different and unique, I call that full spectrum. Bringing together disparate parts of ourselves and what we've got, the twigs, the branches, the flowers, what we have that makes us different, what's available to us, and creating our life's bouquet with that, whatever that looks like. And it's different for everyone. So as I say early in the book, we don't want to compare and despair. Instead, it's like I use the metaphor of a prism. We have a full spectrum, and whatever that looks like, we take that and do our best with what we've got.
great. Well, that's I'm sort of running out of things to say, but you have a number of options for people to engage with this book. I think you have an ebook, an audio. You can buy, I think we have a copy in the library. You can buy
Oh,
the book
good.
for yourselves, which sounds like a book that you might want to own, that you refer back to as you move through all these different phases of your life. And you can
Yeah.
get that through Oblong, support our local bookstore and our co-sponsor. And I guess is there a community based around this work, or?
Yeah, we do. I mean, people, we have, for those of you who love social media, some of you hate it, some of you love it, sort of agnostic about it. But in any event, we do have a community of people who bought the book who are in a Facebook group. And we're going to keep that open for a little while longer. And then we're going to do a little course. We're going to do a mini course, like a 7-day kind of experience, taking people through the book. I'll be teaching live and doing videos. So all of this is to say, if you're interested in any of that, if you just go to riskforward.com, which is the title of the book, riskforward.com, there's a place where you can learn a little more about that. And as Claudia said, we of course want to support local bookstores like Oblong. So if you're in the area, there's some signed copies there. You of course can go to Amazon, but we want to keep our independent bookstores alive. So
Yeah. Well, so if people have questions or comments, or maybe you want to share something about, how this kind of wisdom has played a part in your life, you can put it in the chat. You can unmute yourselves. You can raise your hand. All
yeah,
sorts of options for you.
exactly. I mean, as Claudia said, all of that works. We're such a small group That's really nice. We don't always have this benefit of a small, intimate group. So you're welcome to type in your question or raise your hand, like technically in the reactions, or speak up. I'm here. I'll answer some more questions, and if there are none, then I'll just wrap up with where this all comes from, and we'll all go have dinner.
So Phyllis has a question. I see, I'm assuming that's a raised hand.
Yes, it is. It
Okay.
was. It's not really a question. It's just to say how moving that thing about Patsy was. It was just so wonderful. She was an amazing woman, I must say.
Thank you, Phyllis. Yeah. Yeah. And, it's really how she lived.
Yeah.
She one thing led to the next, and
And she did so much. Oh,
she did so much. Yeah. And without a plan.
she did plan. She planned her funeral very, very well.
Oh, that's true. She did plan her funeral.
Every kid had his or her part.
We each had our role. Yes, she's actually right, Phyllis. Yeah, we all had. She'd already, like, she wants flowers. These are the poems we're going to read.
Exactly. It was quite a bouquet, though.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you so much. It's so great to see you and hear you.
Oh, you're sweet. It was a pleasure to see you too.
Yeah.
So does anyone have anything they'd like to share, or any questions, or are we all heading towards the dinner table?
Congratulations, Victoria.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. How great is that?
Fantastic.
So I think we have a question from Nina Mathis, who has raised her hand. So do you want to unmute, Nina, and
Yeah,
ask your
I
question?
just did. Thank you.
Okay,
found-
great.
I found this just to be a wonderful presentation, and I look forward to reading the book. I've sort of made a motto in life that perfection is boring,
Mm.
because I found anybody who thinks they're perfect, or try to be perfect, or their kids are perfect, or any aspect of their life is perfect, they're pretty boring people, because they're not perfect and we're not perfect. And it's not often that you talk with somebody who acknowledges that, and that it's the imperfections that make people.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more, Nina. One of the things I talk about sometimes in my keynotes is something called the through line, which is this driving force. And I say, look, if your through line is perfection and to show off, like, there are types of parties, weddings, dinner parties you go to where the host or the bride, their whole thing is the show off. And like, those are the parties you go to, and it's like the perfect table and the perfect china and the perfect fingernails. And like, those parties are not fun. But then you go to the party where someone's like still chopping carrots and they've got mustard on their dress. They're like, grab a plate, the china's chipped. Those are fun parties.
Yeah. But it's not. I look forward to reading your book, because I would like to see how one brings that into different parts of your life, whether it's your business relationships, your personal relationships, etc.
Yeah, well, they're definitely. I have a lot of examples in the book, and people who brought together disparate parts. They kind of did their own bouquet with their personalities. They took this part and this part in business or life, and they brought them together to create something really unique.
Now, is that what when you work with the CEOs of the companies and the films, etc., what are you doing, helping them accept that they have to take risks?
Yes. So there are a few parts to my business, but to make it simple, one of them is risk forward. So I work with private clients, groups, keynotes, and then I'm talking about how do we make decisions, how do we move forward, how do we take creative risks in our work. So it's that piece. Then I have a second branch to my business, which is called Rock the Room. And it's the same thing, except in presentation skills, keynotes, webinars, boardroom meetings, Zoom. It's how do you create engaged communications, and that's where I take my background in the arts and take these creative risks, go into the unknown, try something different, bring together parts of your personality. So, for example, one of my clients, she's featured in the book, is the head of mental health at Columbia University. Her name is Kathleen Pike. And she came to one of my Rock the Room workshops. And one of the things that I do is I have them take their profession, their expertise, and then I have them pick a passion that's completely outside that. So, you might be a salesperson who loves magic, or you might be, a leader who loves hiking. And this particular example, she is the head of mental health, but she happens to love Ikebana, which is Japanese flower arranging. And I said, what is the connection between Ikebana and mental health? And at first she said, it's no connection, but we brainstormed. Long story short, she had a big keynote in London in front of 1,000 people for the opening of the Global Mental Health Summit. And what we crafted is she had this extraordinary demonstration. She came out on stage in front of all these clinicians and psychologists and, mental health experts, therapists. And she started her presentation by creating a Ikebana, bouquet, if you will, like the structure with the bowl and the shin and the bow and all these. And what she said is the connection is what people think of as mental health in the global conversation are the branches and the flowers. She said, but what makes the Ikebana flower arrangement so beautiful is not just the branches and the flowers, but the negative space. It's the part that's most essential and most overlooked. And she said, it's the same with mental health. It's essential and overlooked. And she got written up in journals, she got asked to speak at other conferences. So I help leaders and presenters and entrepreneurs and anyone who's to speak do it in their own creative way and stand out from everyone else by taking those risks.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think this Nina has her hand raised again.
No,
Is that
no,
the
no,
other
I'm-
hand, Nina, or? I don't
I'm
know.
taking it down, but thank you very
Okay.
much.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Someone said they have a rock star coworker retiring at 80. Yes, Carrie Clark. This is perfect.
Yeah, so it looks like this is going to be a gift that will be given around the Northwest corner and beyond, which
Excellent.
which is great. No, it's
Yeah, it's a fun book. And I have to say, I'm a little bit partial to the hardcover. Some people are buying the audio, and I'm like, oh, no. I mean, the audio is me reading it, but they're visuals. It's fun to look at. It's fun to hold. So.
No, I mean, I can see it as a book that, like I said, that you'd want to own and you'd want to
Refer back to.
because we're all going to come to these points in our lives, and it's not going to be just now. It could be any time in the future. So, but this was really wonderful. And
I'm
if
so
anyone
glad.
has any more questions, Victoria would be happy to answer them. If not,
I'll start to wrap up.
Yep.
So I'm going to end with this. Some of you know this who know me. I know the Prud'hommes are here. So hello, Prud'hommes and Phyllis. Years ago, I studied with the French mime, Marcel Marceau. And Marcel Marceau was in his 70s at the time. He was performing, by the way, up until he was 80, touring the world and in incredible shape. And I was fortunate enough to study with him and spend time with him and go on the road with him when he was in New York or go backstage. But when I was working with him and studying, he had this wonderful term called risque avant. Victoria, you must risk avant. And in French, of course, that's risk in advance. But it was this type of movement, this position where you were heart open, your weight was forward, almost like the sail of a boat, almost off balance because you were so open and exposed and you were heading off into that kind of unknown. And that is what inspired the title Risk Forward, because I thought, how could that be a philosophy for life? How could we go forward, heart open, heading into the unknown? And so there it is. That is the inspiration. It's in the book. It is Risk Forward. And as I say, at the edge of not knowing is the beginning of the extraordinary.
all right. Well, thank you. That was really, really wonderful. And for
Awesome.
those of you who came in late or who want to recommend this to your friends, it will be up on the Scoville Library YouTube channel, let's say by next week at the latest. So I really appreciate your time, for you coming here, and thank you, Oblong, for co-sponsoring. It was really fabulous. So
Great.
thanks again, and I'm going to end the meeting for everybody. So good night, happy spring, happy dinner if you haven't had it, and see you next time.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Claudia and Scoville.
Okay, you're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.